Madonsela.
To Louise van Rijn and the leadership of Partners for Possibility, our Honorable MEC, the Honorable Lesophie, leaders of various constituencies that are here with us, colleagues, friends, fellow South Africans. It is such an honor to be part of this event. It may have been difficult to get me here, but my heart was always with the initiative. Nobody's heart could be far away from this initiative. Louise and her team are so passionate about educating the South African child, and we can't but be equally passionate when we've been in touch with her, whether physically or via social media. I would say, on behalf of the entire Public Protector South Africa, it is an honor to take part in this important event. I must say that we are grateful to Partners for Possibility and Symphonia for involving us in this celebration. You have shown as Partners for Possibility that it is better to light a candle than mourning the darkness. And indeed, these efforts that we're seeing today and that we see all the time when we follow you on the social media are really about lighting a candle and improving your conditions and people's lives rather than mourning the darkness. As a nation, we mourn a lot. And as a human race, we mourn a lot. I don't know in the other animal kingdom whether they mourn as much as we do as humans. But I think when we witness things such as this initiative, we realize that there's nothing wrong with complaining or correcting what's wrong. But I think there's more nobility in taking action to correct the situation yourself and engineering the change that you want to see in the world. It is Youth Month, so today's celebration is appropriately timed. You will recall that Youth Month, which is June, is really in commemoration of June 16, which will be a few days from now, when we will look back at what young people of our country did in 1976. Partly it was about education, but partly it was about liberation, about creating that egalitarian society where everyone's potential is freed and everyone's life is improved. And they targeted the education system for a reason. That reason can be found in what our icon, the late former President Nelson Mandela, once said about education. He said the following: "Education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world." He also said the following: "Education is the great engine of personal development. It is through education that the daughter of a peasant can become a doctor, the son of a mine worker can become the head of a mine, that the child of farm workers can become the president." When I thought about this initiative, Partners for Possibility, and some of the examples that have been given to us today, I reflected on a story that was in the media today it was from Cliff Central. They told us a story about a college called Masibambane, which is in the township one of the poorest townships in this country called Orange Farm. It's here in Gauteng, where the children there got 100% pass rate in matric last day. It was the third year of having matriculants. And 76% of those children got a university exemption. Now, we always say that the reason children are doing badly in matric is because of apartheid, it's because of the inequalities between the historically black townships and the historically white suburban schools. But this is one school that has proven that if you do something like what Partners for Possibility is doing, you can change the course of history. That any school really can be transformed into a center that creates competent human beings, confident human beings who become leaders of this country. And that's the school. It's there in Orange Farm. You can see what surrounds the school in the image that we have there. But the essence of what they're doing there in Masibambane is what Partners for Possibility is doing. You see the logo there. It's really about holding hands. There's an African saying that says, it takes a village to raise a child. And this project that you're involved in, Ms. Van Rijn, shows that it does take a village to raise a child. But raising that child as a village is really raising our own hopes and eliminating our own fears. Because there is a very clear link between educational inequality, and inequality in broader society. There's also a link between poverty and lack of education or underdevelopment. So if you are contributing into an education system that frees the mind, that liberates every child, you are contributing in the elimination of poverty, you are contributing towards the elimination of inequality, and you are contributing towards a more peaceful and stable world. What can schools do then, along the lines that Partnership for Possibilities is doing, or Symphonia, as the group calls itself? Firstly, leadership is an essential part of what's happening here. If you look at the example of Partnership for Possibilities, the Masibambane example, the one teacher that spoke to us earlier and our colleague from Quest, it's really about leadership. It's about standing up and influencing people to move themselves forward to a better position. It's about leadership, applying leadership principles in the education system and bringing parents and communities into that fold. The success story that is Masibambane, and some of the success stories that we've heard about earlier today, they really about various stakeholders coming together. These would include parents, guardians, teachers, the headmaster, civil society, government, and learners. They ultimately, in the model that Partnership for Possibility is implementing, business is a key part of the solution in terms of transferring skills. The essential understanding there is that leadership is not something up there. It is in all of us. I mean, the stories I've heard about the children themselves being taught to lead themselves and to lead in the school, the principals being assisted to lead, the teachers being assisted to lead, and the community being part of the leadership model. I think what we can learn from what we've heard and from the Mambanani school is that there's an understanding that leading for change starts with changing our culture, our values, our behavior. When I'm talking about culture here, I'm not talking about culture. Normally when we look at culture, we're thinking about traditions. And we're looking at historical traditions. But here I'm talking about culture as being a people's belief system, and value system, the reasoning that underpins our behavior. Every organization, every community has its own culture. In fact, every family has its own culture, which underpins or informs how people behave. So if you're going to change a school, you have to target the culture of that school. You have to target the values of that school. And I liked the story that we heard from our headmaster earlier this morning about how everything has changed, the way people see themselves, the values in that school, and the behavior in the school. Ultimately, when one school changes, others also begin to emulate that. But to get the entire education system to become the education system that will ensure that everyone's potential is freed and that the constitutional dream is realized for everyone in our country, we need to go beyond the school. We all need to play a role in leading and in implementing whatever it is that we're required to implement. So I thought I would talk to you very briefly about what should government do, for example. The answer for government lies in two key sections of the Constitution, perhaps three, but I chose two. Section 237 is a least understood section of the Constitution. Honorable MEC, if there's one thing that I would like to do post being public protector and while being public protector, is to institutionalize Section 237 of the Constitution. If Section 237 of the Constitution underpinned every decision we make in the public protector, there would be no child that is still studying under a tree. There would be no child in the Limpopo province who would die because there was no toilet. There would be no child in any province who doesn't go to school on certain days that they call no school days because the bridges are not there and because the buses can't go because it's raining. Section 237 says all constitutional obligations must be performed diligently and without delay. So what does that mean, colleagues? It means whatever the Constitution says is a must, is peremptory, must get precedence when we're making decisions on public money and public resources. Education is one of those. So education is a constitutional obligation. Why is it so? Because of Section 29. Section 29 provides that everyone has a right to basic education and further education, which the state, through reasonable measures, must make progressively available and accessible. So these constitutional obligations, the right to education, should also be read with other obligations in the Constitution, such as, for example, Section 28, which is the rights of the child. And when we then make certain decisions, we have to take all of these things into account. But also, just underpinning everything else is that we have a constitutional obligation in the preamble to improve the quality of life of every citizen and to free the potential of every person. And where do we start when it comes to freeing the potential of every person? Education system, health, and housing. Health is important because without health, there isn't much you can do, isn't it, with life? This one I know might be a bit controversial, but 20 years into democracy, I've already indicated that we shouldn't be having any children that are studying under trees. And there are no school days. My view then is that there's certain things we've done in 21 years of democracy. This year we're celebrating 21 years of democracy. And I would advise that in the next 21 years of democracy, we should think differently. Before, for example, we change street names, we have to think about, is that a must? There are those offensive ones, but there are those that are nice to change. There are city names that are also nice to change. No, there are those that are offensive, that undermine human dignity. So those would still fall under Section 237, because human dignity is a constitutional right, is a fundamental right. But there's the one where I just don't like the street. Or maybe I remember my hero that I think should be on that street. Before we do that one, then we have to compare and contrast Section 237 with what we're about to do. So that's what we are supposed to do in government. And street names is just an example. There's many other things that we could think about and defer in the interest of education. Where do we come in as the Public Protector South Africa? Just in conclusion, unlike many other institutions in society, unfortunately, we step in when something has already been broken. But that's not tragic, because we're supposed to use the lessons we've learned from fixing what has been broken and throw them back to government to ensure that there's preventative measures that are taken. So where do our powers come from? Colleagues, they come from Section 181 of the Constitution. We're established under Section 181 of the Constitution together with other institutions to strengthen and support constitutional democracy. And we get our powers from Section 182. And our powers are just threefold. We have the power to investigate, we have the power to report, we have the power to take appropriate remedial action. And that's what Section 182 says. And we have to do so when there is an allegation or a suspicion that there's been improper or prejudicial conduct in state affairs. The Constitution says we have additional powers as prescribed by national legislation, and various statutes have given additional powers. The Constitution also says that we must be accessible to all persons and communities. So one of the reasons I'm here is also that I'm being accessible to quite a group of people. Just in conclusion, we have various statutes that give us many powers, and basically, we fix what we think has been broken, and lastly, we also work with you to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes. What can the business community do? Business is already involved in projects such as Partnership for Possibility. And I think business must be commended for this involvement. There are other business people, though, that could be involved, more people. I would ask Partners for Possibility target some of those people who burn money to just show that they have it. I'm sure some of it could come into a kitty, such as Partners for Possibility. The media glorifies people who throw a party for 2 million. I think instead of throwing a party for 2 million, that person could throw some money into a school. And I'm sure the schools wouldn't mind erecting something in honor of that person's memory. It's really about plowing back to communities. From our side, as I've indicated, some of the things that we're dealing with that are problematic, they include bursaries, for example, making sure that those bursaries are released on time. Currently, we're dealing with NEFSAS. We've also dealt with infrastructure complaints as part of our Millennium Development Goals investigation. And lastly, when it comes to issues of education, we're dealing with a very painful issue of what we call stateless children. These are children that have been in this country for more than 20 years. Their parents got into this country illegally. They study, and then once they're in matric, let me see if we need everyone's assistance on this one. Once they're in matric, they can't get their qualifications. So we're not chasing them from the country, we're not sending them to planet Mars. We're keeping them here, but we won't document them. And I don't think that is consistent with Section 28 of the Constitution, and I don't think it's consistent with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Fortunately, we've received a very sympathetic ear from ministers of Home Affairs. It's just a question of how do we pull our hands, how do we join hands to try and solve this problem with finality. Again, thank you to Partners for Possibility. Thank you to the business community that is part of this project. I am hoping that all of us, in one way or another, will find a way beyond just paying for relatives' fees that we do, but we'll find a way to be part of this project. Keep up the good work.